The common experience that we have when we are going through difficulties, or we are going through we have some sort of identity, or we are in some sort of occupation, or when we are in a daily routine of expressing ourselves to others, one of the things we look for the most is that there's people that we can connect with. And people who are coming from the same place as us. We look for this all the time. And even Jesus told us, as we consider the golden rule in Matthew 7, he said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And he helps us to kind of understand that connection through empathy is huge and significant. When I am going through some sort of pastoral trial, I like to talk to other pastors. When I'm going through some sort of photography problem, I like to talk about that with other photographers, particularly wedding photographers, right? And for you, in whatever field you're in, whatever occupation you're having, when you're struggling someplace or you need some sort of wisdom or knowledge or help, you go to the people that can see things from your perspective or see or have a shared perspective as you. I was just talking to somebody this week, and they have been really, really struggling with a huge trial in their life. And in this trial that's in their life, one thing that they kind of observed and noticed is that they've isolated themselves. They've isolated themselves. And in the struggle that they have, they're kind of consumed with this big trial in their life. This person reflected, I'm only talking to the people right now that understand. The people that are going through similar things or have gone through similar things. And it's powerful when there's people that are in our lives that we can connect with and go, oh, you too? Oh my goodness, you went through that? Oh, and you've got more experience with that? And what we're going to be exploring as we consider and celebrate the incarnation of God, the humanity of God, is to consider that what the incarnation is about. There's so many things you could say it's about, but at least we can say this, that God himself became one of us in order to share a perspective with us. God is so often thought of as this distant curmudgeon who's sitting in a throne someplace that I've never seen, that's casting judgment on people that he doesn't know, he knows about them, but he doesn't know, and is dismissive of us when we are struggling or suffering or in pain. And we see him as distant. And the incarnation, the Christmas season is a reminder, brothers and sisters, is a reminder that God is not just close to us, but he's in us. And he's with us. And we're in him. And that's all made possible through God becoming one of us in Jesus Christ. And it's so mind-blowing because there's no God that's like this. There's no story that's like this. Where God is going to enter into the suffering and the pain and the temptation and all of the same struggles that we have so that we can actually go, oh wow, not only do we have a God who empathizes with us, but we can empathize with him. One thing I've noticed as I've been a leader and seen leaders or seen any kind of leader is that most people don't empathize with leaders because they're followers, right? Kids don't empathize with parents until they're parents, right? And what's mind-blowing here, and what we're going to be talking about, is that the incarnation, the humanity of God, is about God's shared perspective. And our big idea, as you've been seeing on the screen, if we could just go back one, our big idea is this: God came to see from our perspective so that we could see from his. God came to see from our perspective so that we could see from his. And much like we even see shows about this. Remember Undercover Boss? There's a show, right? Undercover Boss, a really amazing show because it's all about empathy and what it's like for the one who built the company or who leads the company to go and work at the bottom level and see what most of his employees are going through. And it's always life-changing. It's always a process of transformation that happens to this leader, connects them in their company and makes things completely different. And one way to think about it is that Jesus is the ultimate undercover boss. He's the ultimate undercover boss. And so all we're going to do this morning is we're going to reflect on what we just kind of read from Luke and consider from the book of Hebrews how this shared perspective works itself out. And the first thing we're going to look at is our perspective. Jesus shared our perspective. And if you're in the book of Hebrews, in chapter 2, particularly chapter 2 and then chapter 4, the first thing that we start to read about is the first thing that he shares with us in a perspective is he shares flesh and blood with us. He shares flesh and blood with us. And when we think of God, and we think of the God particularly as he's unfolded who he is in the Old Testament, in some instances we think of an ethereal God who's spirit. We think of the storm cloud God, right, who led Israel through the Exodus, right? And we think of the angel of the Lord who appeared, right? We think of Isaiah's vision where he saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple with glory. We think of those images from the Old Testament, and we've never could imagine that that's all pointing to him actually taking on skin. I love how John says that the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. Right? He tented with us. It's an allusion back to the Exodus, that he's joining us in the desert. And here, as he shares our perspective, he shares flesh and blood with us, right? In Hebrews 2:14, right? Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, the children meaning the children whom he would save, the ones he would call brothers and sisters, the children share in flesh and blood. He himself likewise partook of the same things. And then in verses 16 and 17, for surely it is not the angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. That's God's people, right? Those in Christ. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect. And as we heard from Luke's account, right, Jesus shared the same kind of live birth that we've all had, with all of its inconveniences, with all of the pain that goes into that, with all of the, we'll say the trials, the fragilities of this experience. Get experienced. Jesus didn't get a pass on this because Mary was giving birth to God in the flesh. She didn't get any hey, how about an epidural? Not even that. Not even that. She got the experience of every single person. And Jesus, on the other side of this, got the experience of every other person of that time, right? With the limitations and inconveniences and fragilities. And he wasn't born like Benjamin Button, like an old man, or in reverse, right? He didn't come full stock barreled, like loaded with all the knowledge. He didn't come with all of the prior history and experience already preloaded so that as soon as he came out of the womb, he was like, hey, so here's the thing, I'm God. That's not the way it happened. And he cried. And he had his own experiences. There's blood involved, right? This is not a process that was somehow bypassed. And think about that. God didn't just teleport and be like, what's it like to be human? I wonder. Like he didn't just like pop down and walk among us like he could have and just pretend to be one of us, which is one of the actual early heresies. So God was just pretending to be one of us, which is kind of silly because that's kind of what the angel of the Lord was. But even though back in the Old Testament, people knew, whoa, this is someone different here. And he didn't just blend in. And he wasn't able to walk right away, right? I remember we got, when we had horses, my parents had bought a pregnant horse. Her name was Dee Dee, and we had Cookie. Cookie looked like a cow, black and white, Oreo cookie. And I remember we got the call like 3 a.m. when Dee Dee's giving birth to Cookie, and we got there like minutes after, and Cookie from the womb could walk. It's insane, right? I mean, it took 2 seconds before Cookie got up and she's like, oh, and you're like, whoa. Like Jesus did not fast forward or bypass the experience that we all have, the slow human process of a baby being helpless and still missing the womb and wanting to be swaddled because the baby's going to cry because it's like, I want tightness. I want to be held so tightly. And he was dependent on the care of his parents and family to keep him alive. He had to be fed. He was dependent. And he had to grow up just like you, day by day, breath by breath. And because of this choice to enter into skin with us and to share flesh and blood, this meant that he also shared another perspective about temptation and suffering. To be human is to be tempted. To human is to suffer. And this suffering is self-imposed. And this is kind of the interesting thing about what Jesus is doing here. Jesus is entering into the human race in the line and lineage of Adam and Eve. He's an extended child, just like Ed had read from Genesis 3:15, a prophecy of a child, right? As he looks back to his lineage, and this is the importance of Genesis, if you want to see this genealogy, is to help us understand where our Savior comes from. And guess what? The line is damaged. The line has been judged. In Romans 5, we read about that, right? Because of the sin of our forefathers, we inherit the judgment and the pain that they went through, right? They broke the covenant. Pain and tragedy are inescapable realities to every human, and Jesus was no exception. And we read about this. Let's read this together. Verse 10 of Hebrews 2. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. Chapter 4, verse 15. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So we can often say, like, listen, I wasn't Adam and I wasn't Eve. I did not sin in the garden. Why do I have to suffer? Why do I have to go through all of these things? And we have this imputed nature that's given to us. And along with that, you have if you want to say imputed, we'll say transferred kind of reality to us. And along with that comes the judgment. But the thing is, no matter what, we would have done exactly what Adam and Eve would have done if we were in their spot. A lot of us think we'd be the exception. Well, I would, could a talking snake, what? That's ridiculous. I would sit there, I would not succumb to that. This is, if it's even real, right? This is what we say to ourselves in our minds, right? And if I were there, you know what I would have done? I would have pet the snake, I would have talked to it, and I would have convinced it was wrong. Or, maybe I would have killed it, kind of like Jesus did in the Passion movie when he stomped on the snake. Yeah, I love that. I would have done that. And we like to imagine that we would have done things better. And the truth is, as one of my professors, Marshall Wicks, used to say, we would not only have chosen the fruit, we would have made some sort of sauce from it. We would have put that on a nice pork chop, right? A nice fig sauce maybe, huh? Right? Make a nice reduction. Beautiful. Mwah. A little balsamic. Now we're talking, right? And that's true. We would all do that. But so Jesus ultimately is inheriting all of the, we'll say, the negative connotations of being human, which he literally did not merit. He literally did not do. He faced sin and temptation. And the one thing he can't really empathize with is actually sinning. Because he didn't cross the line, he didn't cross the border, as it were, into sin. But yet, he faced everything that we face, all the different kinds of trials and temptations. And, the scriptures help us, and that's what I love about the Bible. The Bible's real. It's about real life and real pain and real tragedy and real suffering and real heartache. It's not about fairy stories. It's about fake stuff, imaginary stuff. Especially if you read the Psalms, it's about heartbreak. Right? Genesis is just this devastating. You put Genesis into a movie, it's going to be probably X-rated. and most people, it would be banned from them actually being able to watch the actions that took place. Thank you, Moses, for guarding our eyes to all of the details, right? But from the beginning, Adam and Eve faced the appealing temptation to make themselves their own gods, right? By breaking God's commandments. It's interesting in Genesis 3. But as we read, as anybody who's read their Bible may know, in Matthew 4, right, in Luke 4, Jesus faced the same head-to-head temptation. And it's even worse for Jesus. He doesn't have a partner with him. He's alone. And instead of being able to stay in the garden and stick with one commandment, literally, Satan is saying, why don't you bypass this whole process? If you're the Son of God, hey, why don't you, if you just do whatever I say, I'm going to give you everything, right? And Jesus lived just like all of us in slavery, in some kind of slavery to impending death. So that's being used, and this is the power of Satan that he used over us. If you don't, you'll die, right? Death is always the stakes, and we always pay attention when the stakes are high, right? Any story, right? Especially Star Wars just came out, right? Stakes are high when people's lives are on the line. We actually care when there's characters that may die or are dying, right? We're invested. And so here it is. Jesus had the opportunity, bypass this whole thing. Or, you know what? Hey, listen, I've got the power to raise you up, so why don't you I'm going to bring you up to the highest point of the temple complex. You just jump down. I got you. You just do what I tell you, and I'll keep you safe. So he had an opportunity to bypass. But what did he do? He went back and he quoted Deuteronomy and started to point out the lies. Started to point out, you really don't know what you're talking about. But you know what's interesting in the temptation is that Adam and Eve, just like with Jesus, their identity was what was challenged. And the thought that you have to obtain your own identity, that you have to earn it somehow, do something in order to get it, that's powerful. It's a powerful temptation. Who am I, right? It's a question we all have. And maybe I got to do something in order to earn my keep. And then King David. King David was someone who would suffer big time big time. He suffered at the hands of King Saul, right? He actually was a servant of King Saul. He wanted to serve him. He was King Saul's, his son's best friend. Jonathan was his like blood brother, right? And Saul hated David. And he persecuted him and chased him down all over the place. And then later in his life, his own son, Absalom, would supplant him as the king and try to take everything from him, including his wives. And raise this huge smear campaign against him, right? And David, half the Psalms that you find in the Old Testament were written by David. And those Psalms are heartbreaking. About half of those are just crying and saying, "Where are you, Lord?" Right? Psalm 22 starts off with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Because it feels like when we're suffering, God has forsaken us. It feels like when we're going through the trials of our life, that he's not there. But what would Jesus say on the cross? What would he do? How far does his shared perspective go? Not only did he inspire the Psalms and inspire David to say those words, he used them himself on the cross. When he was on the cross, he said, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," right? Which is Aramaic for, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When Jesus was actually being forsaken for our sin. And this is what this whole thing was all about, was to rescue us, right? And in order to rescue us, he chased us all the way down to all of the parts of our humanity that are unpleasant and ugly and tragic. And he said, "I'll take that. I'll take that. I'll go all the way to doing everything that he did not deserve, experiencing what he did not deserve." This is beautiful. He came to take our perspective. And I know you may feel that you don't have someone in your life who's sympathetic to your situation, right? And sometimes, so if you're a mom, guess what? You run to moms, don't you? You want to talk to moms. And not just that, certain kinds of moms. You don't want to talk about all the moms, right? You want to talk to the moms that have the same amount of kids that you have the same income level as you, have the same kind of idiot husband as you, right? 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 Or if you're at work, you don't want to talk to your boss. You want to talk to people on your level, in a different department probably, so that you can sit there and unload and vent and talk about all the things that are happening to you. And this is incredible. We actually have a God who can go, "Yep, been there. Yep, that sucks. Yep, that's hard. Wow, what are you going to do?" He can empathize and sympathize with us. And in the process, what he does and what he's trying to do is help us to understand his perspective. Right? Isn't this what all good relationships are about? Shared perspective, helping us to see from each other's perspective. And we are in luck. We are in great fortune because we get to see from his perspective. That's really what the scriptures are all about, isn't it? It's this shared, fused perspective where we get to see his sharing our perspective and we can share his perspective. And then the first way that we understand his perspective is through his death and resurrection. Through his death and resurrection. We get this in Hebrews 2, right? Hebrews 2. Starting verse 9, "But we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. For it was fitting for he for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, right? We read this before, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. How can an already perfect, immortal, invisible, God only wise, the one who's never wrong, the one who's always right, still have something to learn? He learned through going through our experiences. And you know what? It made him a better God. It made him a better high priest. It made him a better friend. It made him a better everything for us. And the cross of Christ is the ultimate experience for our God to share our perspective, because it is the place where he substituted his life for ours to take the judgment that we deserve. And this glorious act was precisely designed so that we could experience his eternal life. He wants us to experience his joy. He wants us to experience never-ending harmony and peace and shalom. And what it's like to have in glory a shared perspective, so you always feel safe, you always feel heard, you always feel listened to and valued. This is just unbelievable. And we read even more about this in Hebrews 5, right? In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Through the cross, he experiences the sin that in the judgment that we deserve. But through the resurrection, what he does is he transfers to us an innocent plea, an innocent standing before God to go, you're okay. God's not mad at you. Do you love that? Steve Brown, he's a pastor in Florida, says it all the time. God's not mad at you. We think he's mad at us. And a baby in a manger is here to tell you he's not mad at you. He loves you and he's here for you all the way. And he doesn't want you to just have birth. Anybody can have birth here, not anybody, but all of us have had. He wants us to have a new birth. He wants us to have an adoption and a standing. And he wants to give it all to us. We've won the lottery in Jesus. And nothing that happens to you can ever take that away. And you know, what's interesting is that the audience, that the author of Hebrews, I say the author of Hebrews, we don't know who wrote it. We don't know if it was the Apostle Paul. We don't know if it was Luke. We don't know who it was, which is kind of fun. Just to show you that we don't know everything, right? But who he was writing to was a group of believers who were Jewish, that believed in Jesus as their Messiah, but they were being tempted through all the pain and suffering that they were experiencing in the persecution to turn their back on Jesus and go back to Judaism. And maybe one of the reasons why they were turning back when things got really, really hard and they were seeing their friends get imprisoned and they were losing things and their reputation was being marred, maybe it's because they forgot that Jesus has been through this, right? They forgot. And here's the reminders. Not that he's just been through this, but the standing on earth is not what matters. It's our standing in heaven that does. Hebrews 2, Verses 14 and 15. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things. Let's read this together. That through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. Wow. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that awesome? How does he, children, how does he destroy death? How does he destroy death? What? He came to life. It's through resurrection. It's through resurrection. And what's going to happen to all of those who are in Christ when they die? Resurrection. And this is how he cracks the curse. He breaks the curse. The curse of death is nullified through resurrection. And so that means that you here, even though you may be subject to lifelong slavery of thinking and fearing death, which if you really trace back all your fears, is what it comes down to. You think about it? Oh no, my bank account's low. Why does that bother you? And you just keep chasing that thought. Why does that bother me? Oh, well, it's going to mean more work. Do I have to work more? Does it mean that I have to sell things? Does it mean I have to go down in lifestyle? Well, I guess that's not the worst thing in the world, right? Okay. Or is it because you think somehow, as this happens, that you somehow are in fear that this is going to lead you down a path that's going to lead to someone's death or someone's not going to be safe. Like, really chase these things down. This is powerful, right? Remember how Satan is trying to lure us through our identity, right? Earn your identity. Earn your identity. What's Jesus saying? You got it. I'm giving it to you. It's a gift. That's part of seeing from his perspective. And the resurrection changes all of that. Here we are. We're talking about the birth, and I'm talking about resurrection. But this is what Easter is what Christmas is all about, right? So he shares death and resurrection, all right? Or he wants us to share his death and resurrection. And the status that comes with that, the justification and approval that God's not mad at you status. And not only that, but he wants to be merciful and faithful to us. He wants to be merciful and faithful to us. And you're thinking, wow, Dave, we're here in Hebrews. You read all of Luke 2, and what are you even going to say about that? We circle back to Luke 2. It wasn't a coincidence that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, or that shepherds came to see him celebrate his birth. Bethlehem was the place where the shepherds were helping to raise what would become the sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem, not just 6 or 7 miles away. His ancestor David was a shepherd. Bethlehem is a place of shepherds. It's not a big lush land. It's not like the Jezreel Valley where you see rain and you see crops. No, there's some grass there, but it's more arid and hilly in the Judean countryside. And this is a place where shepherds would be raising the flocks that would be sold for sacrifices in the temple. Not even the shepherds that saw Jesus could even imagine that their heavenly shepherd would become one of the sheep. And that he would one day be offered to take away the sins of all of the sheep. God took our skin so that he could take away our sin. Jesus was our ultimate sacrifice before he became our ultimate high priest. He's the only priest that offers himself as the sacrifice. You're not going to find this with Zeus. You're not going to find this in any of the Hindu gods. You're not going to find this with Buddha. This is right here. You're not going to find this with Muhammad. You find it in one person. His name is Jesus. And in chapter 2, verses 17 and 18, we read this. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect. And can we read this together? So that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. He's gone through all of the same temptations that we have. The temptations to bank our identity in life on what we do. The temptations to ditch God because things aren't going our way. Our plan doesn't seem to be being executed just right. The temptation to be angry and bitter at the people in our lives because they're idiots and they don't understand how abusive they are and how much they've hurt us. The temptation to look for refuge in all of the wrong places. And Jesus is saying, I can help you with that. I can help you with that. Because the temptation to sin is covered by my blood. And my presence is here right now for you. He not just shares his perspective with us, he shares his presence with us. He's with us. To be the ultimate high priest, it means he can hear all of our prayers simultaneously. He already knows what we're going to pray. He already knows what the temptations are. He already knows everything. He's omniscient. And he's, through experience, gone through it. Hence the incarnation, right? And this makes him perfect for us. Perfectly merciful, right? And 100% faithful to us. He's not going to let us go. Think about the commitment it takes. I think I'm going to be a human. And guess what? He's still a human. He didn't lose his humanity, right? What did he do? He enhanced it. He completed it. He perfected it, just like he's perfecting you. Just like we all have to learn as children and babies and grow through the process, that's what's happening spiritually to us too. And in Hebrews 4, we'll read this together. Hebrews 4, we get this great encouragement to us from the author of Hebrews. Let's read this together. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. Let us with him draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. And we're all hurting right now at some level. We're all hurting, right? We're all incomplete right now, we feel. There's a gap right now. There's an insecurity right now. And guess what? We have the one with all of the answers and with all of the help. This is why we celebrate his humanity. This is why. Because this is what it's all going to. And I know it can be hard for us to feel like we have to hold on. Like this is what we feel like we're holding on to Jesus. Oh, you're being pulled away like Luke from, The Empire Strikes Back. You know what I mean? With an arm chopped off, hanging off, waiting for the Millennium Falcon to catch you. That's what it feels like, right? Like leaves flapping in the wind, right? That's what it feels like. And the truth of it is that he's already held us. He's already holding us. He's the one who's holding us fast. And that's why we can hold our confession. It's because he's holding us. And we have access. When we come to a throne, right? We come to a kingly throne, which is hard for Americans. This is not us, okay? We do not bend the knee, right? But would you bend the knee for grace, for help, for rescue, for the presence of God? This is exactly what the shepherds did in a manger. Imagine that. A manger was his first throne. And his humanity here shows us this, right? God came to see from our perspective so that we could see from his. Let's pray, ask the Lord's help, and we'll have communion. Scott will lead us.